Welcome, everybody. Okay, well, I think we can get started. I think there are people still filtering in. So, Lori, I also am so excited for this. I see that in the chat. We are so thrilled you have joined us today for our kickoff session of the book study on harnessing the science of learning. So welcome to the very first session. We are so glad you're here. And Laura, there we go. So we will be, I say we, but our wonderful host will be leading us together through a wonderful examination of this relatively new book, Harnessing the Science of Learning by Dr. Nathaniel Swain. And I can tell you that I've gotten a bit of a sneak peek of what's to come in this series, and you are in for a real treat. Laura has really carefully considered how to scaffold this learning for us all and how to support us all considering this content and how it's relevant to our work with students. So we would like to acknowledge that ONLit's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. I will soon be passing it over to our wonderful host this evening, Laura Bross, who is just fantastic. You may have seen some of her work with ONlit, especially her webinar where she talks about how she plans instruction in her class. So we're just so thrilled that she's really digging into this book with us across the winter. She teaches grade 2-3 in the Avon-Maitland District School Board, and she is a wonderful member of our ONlit team. And feel free to reach out to her. Her contact information is on the slide as well. One thing, as we continue introductions, one thing Laura was especially wanting to make sure that she did in this series was bring in additional perspectives and additional insights. So she has structured an informed insight process structure framework where each session there will be a guest. Today it will be a guest recording by the book's author, Dr. Nathaniel Swain, but there promise to be some other wonderful people joining us down the road as well, so stay tuned for that. Dr. Swain is a teacher, he's an instructional coach, he teaches educators, and he's also an author, and he is based out of La Trobe University in Australia, and he is the founder of Think Forward Educators. So we are so thrilled that he was able to share some thoughts through recording with us this evening. And with that, Laura, I think I will pass it over to you.
Okay, let's get started. So hello, everyone. Welcome to ONLit's Harnessing the Science of Learning book study. I am so excited that you'll be joining us tonight and over the next few months. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together. So first, let's go over our structure. Just gonna fix my screen a bit there. There we go. Throughout this book study, we will be releasing new additions to our evidence-informed educator series. This series includes simplified one-page resources to support educators as they learn and share this learning with their own communities. Each week, we will have an informed insight section where an expert guest will join us to break down difficult content from the book and support our learning. Today, Dr. Swain himself has shared 2 special recordings with us to introduce the book study and get us started with cognitive load theory. Then we will finish with evidence into practice, classroom examples on how we can transform this knowledge into learning in our classrooms. So now a little bit about me. I am a grade 2-3 classroom educator with the Avon-Maitland District School Board. My original plan was to be a secondary school teacher and graduated with intermediate senior qualifications in 2009. I then completed my primary and junior qualifications soon after, landed my first job in grade 5, and ended up in the elementary division ever since. Since 2009, I have taught most elementary grades between 1 to 8 and have done the CERT position. Currently, I love learning about the evidence and bringing it to life with my grade 2-3 students. Since last year, I have been a member of the curriculum assistance team with ONlit. This has been such a fulfilling position, learning from my colleagues and supporting educators across the province. I am truly grateful to get to do this work. On a personal note, I am a mother of 3 and a U11 girls hockey coach with the Lucknow Wingham 86ers. I love spending time with my family and having fun in my community. As a final note, I want to add that I am a working educator. I am not an expert. I am not a researcher. I am an educator who gets up each day, teaches a busy group of students, finds lost mitts, gets sneezed on, and gets occasionally called mom by a student. I will do my best to be true to the research, but I can guarantee I will make a mistake or fumble a term. This book study is a place for us all to learn about the evidence, reflect on our practice, and bring it to life in our classrooms, no matter what stage of the journey. We are all welcome here. Let's take a minute to look forward at our schedule. You'll notice our schedule is bi-weekly until March. Then our schedule stretches out to tri-weekly. This was just to support scheduling with the break and a few other events. Each week, we will have an expert guest join us. Drum roll, here we go. These guests include, beginning tonight, we will be joined via video recording by Dr. Nathaniel Swain. He will be welcoming us tonight and introducing us to cognitive load theory. On February 6th, we will be joined by Dr. Nidhi Sachdeva. Dr. Sachdeva is an educator, researcher, and evidence-informed learning designer from OISE at the University of Toronto and is chair of Research Ed Conference Toronto. Her expertise will help us explore the cognitive science outlined in these chapters. On February 20th, we will be joined by Dr. Jamie Peevler. Dr. Peevler is an elementary teacher, literacy coach, researcher, instructor, and reading science program director at Mount St. Joseph University. She will share her expertise on effective literacy teaching, explicit instruction, and how to plan for and teach in whole class and small group settings. On March 6th, we will be joined by Dr. Robin Cotting. Dr. Cotting is professor of school psychology at Northeastern University, associate editor of academic journals, and co-author of the book Effective Math Interventions, a guide to improving whole number knowledge. She will share her expertise on conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, worked examples, and retrieval practice. On March 27th, we will be joined by Scott Hill, Superintendent of Evergreen School Division in Manitoba, Canada. Mr. Hill and his team were awarded the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Award for their dedication to professional development, supporting teachers in implementing evidence-based practices, and providing impactful interventions. We will discuss the 4E implementation model and his journey with implementation and pursuing sustainable system-wide change. Finally, on April 17th, we will be joined by an extra special guest. Author of the book himself, Dr. Nathaniel Swain, will be joining us live. Please note that this date is the Thursday before the Easter long weekend, but it meant that Swain could join us himself. An hour with Dr. Swain will be a great way to start our long weekend. So now let's get started. A special thank you to Dr. Swain. He has been so kind and generous when planning this book study. Let's begin with this 4-minute video from Dr. Swain, personally welcoming every one of you to our book study.
Welcome to this exciting book study of Harnessing the Science of Learning. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Swain, and I'm very excited to share this book with you. I first have to introduce myself a little bit. I'm a senior lecturer in learning sciences at the Solar Lab at the School of Education. in La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also the founder of Think Forward Educators, a grassroots movement of teachers and educators using the science of learning in their practice. And I also have a blog for teachers called The Cognitorium, which I host on my website. I am really excited to have worked on this project and to collaborate with so many fantastic thought leaders and put together some insights for you in this volume. I've also really enjoyed capturing the stories and the examples of so many schools and case studies here in Australia, which are also very applicable in other countries around the world. So, really, what has driven me to share this book with you and with everyone is the power that stories and case studies have in sharing ideas and moving practice forward. So, Annie Murphy Paul makes the really tangible point that our brains do not make much of a distinction between reading about an experience and encountering it in real life. In each case, the same neurological regions are stimulated. So, for this reason, stories have incredible power to communicate complex ideas, new ideas, and ideas that challenge. And given that the science of learning is such a new body of knowledge for many educators, it's a really interesting way, I think, to try and move from the current impasse that we have. So, in this way, stories have the power to change minds as well. So, interestingly, I believe, and I've been talking about in many talks around the world, that we are in a time of edu renaissance, a time of increased interest in the work of teachers and the work that we do in classrooms. And as a teacher myself, I love that there's a focus and an interest in what teachers do. And I think it plays out in lots of different ways. The edu renaissance can be seen in the way that our practice is suddenly a really important feature, not just the systems around us and the size of classrooms or the amount of resourcing that we have, but also the work and the nuts and bolts of the classroom and how it all plays out together, curriculum assessment and pedagogy at once. There's also many changes around the world in terms of policy. In the Australian context, there's many government initiatives and reforms aimed at changing and improving the work of teachers, and these are aligning quite nicely with the science of learning. There's also a movement, a global movement, and also local movements that are looking to empower educators to do good work. So I really believe in the power of stories to change minds, and it's for this reason that the first 3 chapters are an opportunity to delve into the featured case stories, which are then peppered throughout the other chapters that follow. Some other themes that come through that I guess try and communicate some of these key ideas are that there are many applications and uses of the science of learning, and that the science of learning has the opportunity to change your teaching for the better, to make your life a little bit easier as an educator, to improve outcomes for students, and also to reach all learners. So there's a big discussion and comparison of different case studies in one of those chapters in the first section of the book, which looks at how, although schools may have different starting points and learners may have different starting points, the practices that align with the science of learning have many great applications, and many of which will benefit the students at the lowest performing end of the spectrum, as well as those who are already needing extension. So I hope that you really enjoy the first 3 chapters and that you enjoy the start of this book study. It's really exciting to work with you, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Swain. I love how he talks about the power of stories. Stories can change minds. Stories can change lives. Let's start our story tonight. So to begin, I want to spend some time and share more with you about the Evidence-Informed Educator series. So who is an evidence-informed educator? It can be anyone who resonates with the following guiding principles. Have a number ready to waterfall in the chat that resonates with you. An evidence-informed educator is someone who is committed to continued learning and growth. Someone who is guided by the wide, deep, and evolving body of research on how children learn. Someone who understands that instruction is a controllable factor that is critical to student success. Someone who creates safe and supportive learning environments for ourselves, our students, and our colleagues. someone who celebrates the courage it takes to change beliefs and practices, and someone who always puts students first. So take a moment and add your number to the chat. Which principle resonates with you?
Laura, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but there's a whole lot of numbers flying in. Trying to think of a general trend. Lots of threes, lots of ones, some sixes, some twos. It's a pretty even mix. 1 and 6. 1, 2, 3. Lots coming in.
They are going fast.
Yep, they are.
Well, that's great because they're all important. So we got them all in there. Okay. Now, how can this series be used? This series is a growing set of simple visuals or one-page summaries to get learning started. They are not an exhaustive or absolute collection. We must be prepared for and willing to embrace new learning as the research evolves. They are designed to be a launching point for anyone in education. These are to help people get change started and lead themselves and others to more comprehensive sources, like Dr. Swain's Harnessing the Science of Learning book. This series is for anyone looking to start, extend, and share their story of evidence-informed practice. This is for educators looking to improve their own practice, instructional coaches to enhance professional learning, principals to initiate and sustain school-wide change, district leadership to embed impactful change across systems, and parents advocating for their children and their communities on the importance of evidence-informed instruction. The Evidence-Informed Educator series can now be found on the ONlit Resource Library. It is free to access to anyone and will grow and evolve as we work through this book study. The link is being posted in the chat. In the fall, the first of these one-pagers was shared on the ONlit Resource Library. The instructional hierarchy is a model of skill acquisition. The hierarchy has been researched for decades. When we learn something new, we move through a series of predictable stages. It's important for educators to be aware of the instructional hierarchy, since we are most effective when our instruction matches the student's current level of proficiency. The hierarchy begins at the acquisition stage. At this stage, students are slow and inaccurate as they have limited knowledge of the target skill. The instructional decisions we make need to match the skill progression of the student. Instructional strategies that are most useful to increase accuracy include explicit and systematic instruction, immediate feedback, and opportunities for guided practice. In the fluency stage, students are now accurate with the target skill, but they are slow and not yet automatic. They require additional opportunities to practice the skill and build accurate and fast performance. As educators, we need to facilitate fluency by ensuring our students get enough purposeful and varied practice opportunities until they are automatic and reach mastery with the skill. In the adaptation and generalization stages, students apply and generalize this fluency into new contexts and settings with greater independence. Once we have acquisition, once we have that fluency, then students can generalize and adapt it. This resource has now been expanded into 3 forms depending on your professional needs. First, we have this simple visual to get learning started or to use as review later on in professional learning. We have also included this version that has a little bit of text explaining the hierarchy. And our original resource that includes instructional examples that match each stage of the hierarchy. Now you can choose which version works best for you and your colleagues on your professional learning journey. Now, let's get back to harnessing the science of learning. Chapter 4 was not assigned for tonight's session, but I want to take advantage of our time to get started on a critical concept that is threaded throughout the science of learning and this book, cognitive load theory. Dylan Williams shared back in 2017 that this is the single most important thing for teachers to know. The more I learn about cognitive load theory and use it to reflect on and plan learning in my classroom, the more I agree with this statement. Let's take a minute to read this quote from page 35 of our book. The crucial point for educators to understand is that working memory is limited. When I began my career in education, working memory appeared a few times in some documents or on some IEPs, but I really had no understanding of what it meant and how I could make instructional decisions to support the limitations of working memory. If a document said a student had poor working memory, I had no idea how to plan instruction for that particular student. And in reality, my class as a whole. Little did I know that all humans have working memory limitations, and there is evidence out there to inform us on how we can plan instruction to ensure all students can access learning. Educators can make decisions to limit cognitive overload. To take us through cognitive load theory more thoroughly, Dr. Swain has shared with us this 10-minute video. Please note, there is a section where he adds music to show how working memory can be overloaded. It only takes a few seconds, but he just wanted me to share that with you all before, that the music is played on purpose to demonstrate the effect extraneous load can have on learning, just so no one thinks that there is a glitch going on with the Zoom call.
Hello and welcome to another short video about this book study of Harnessing the Science of Learning. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Swain, and it's a pleasure to be talking with you. I want to delve into now not just the edu renaissance, but also some of the challenges that lay ahead, which I have called wicked challenges in many different forms over the last few months. They're wicked challenges because they involve um, the really big task of how to spread change and refine practices at a grand scale. One of the first wicked challenges which we're going to delve into is teacher knowledge. And given that the science of learning is not a body of knowledge that's familiar to teachers in their teacher preparation, by and large, this is a big gap to try and rectify. So the science of learning helps illuminate four main ideas, which I tackle in chapter 4, and they help summarize what this teacher knowledge gap is. The first one is that the fact that learning is actually very hard, and that's the main one that we're going to look at in this short video. There's others though, so it looks at how knowledge can help power learning, and how if we know what our students' background knowledge is, if we know how to break knowledge down into manageable chunks and to provide opportunities for them to consolidate key understandings and knowledge, that you can actually overcome some of those difficulties. Similarly, if you know how learning happens, you can also use great teaching methods to help facilitate that learning. And the fourth one is the fact that forgetting is a part of learning. We actually forget most of what we learn. But if we understand things like retrieval practice, spacing, and interleaving, we can ensure that students don't have to forget everything that we teach them. So let's look first at why learning is hard. And I want to look particularly at the simple model of memory and then something called cognitive load theory. So the simple model of memory is also called the information processing model, and it's a simplified model of how learning happens in the brain. So basically, we're looking at a problem called the working memory bottleneck that plays out. So here in this diagram, we have the environment represented here. And to be honest, the environment and what we can learn from it is infinite. There's no reason for us to ever stop learning from the world around us, whether it's books or peers or the experiences that we might have through exploration. And in terms of long-term memory, where we store that knowledge, this is also practically limitless. And so there's no reason for us to stop learning. There's no sort of storage full warning that comes on to say that it's completely full. So there's one important buffer called attention, which does get in the way of this limitless source of learning and limitless storage of learning. And attention is crucial because we cannot learn about something that we're not paying attention to. And in such a world that we live in, attention is also fragile, and there's many distractions in our students' lives and in our classrooms potentially as well. If only we paid attention and then suddenly we would learn things, but there's one more important buffer, and that is called working memory. And working memory is extremely limited. It's only a few items that can be held at a time, and if they're not mentally rehearsed, those items will disappear. So working memory is also refreshed and cleared very frequently, every 10 or 15 seconds or so. And it's here, though, in working memory that we do our active thinking and our thoughts sort of take place. So it's what we're paying attention to at any given time or what we're thinking about. Forgetting is actually part of this model as well. So you notice that there's things that are forgotten from long-term memory if we don't retrieve them often enough. And there's also things that are forgotten and don't even make it to long-term memory. So they go straight from working memory and out. But ideally, when this is working well, we can draw down on things that we do know from our long-term memory, bring that into our working memory, and use it to solve increasingly challenging problems. So the main way that we can overcome this working memory bottleneck is by having more information that's relevant to the task in our long-term memory. And then we can bypass those strict limitations of working memory, which are limited by the number of items, but not the size of the items. So if we know something about a topic, if we have lots and lots of rich content knowledge, and we can see the patterns or pieces of that knowledge play out in different tasks or problems we're trying to solve, then these restrictions don't apply nearly as much. And that's what really student learning and increasing student expertise is all about. So I hope that that was really helpful, but essentially our job as teachers is to go from something that might be meaningless and feel quite arbitrary and therefore take up lots of space in our working memory into something that's actually meaningful. And when it's meaningful, when it connects to our prior knowledge, we can actually do much more complex work with that information. So this model relates directly to something called cognitive load theory, which John Sweller has made famous, and he's an Australian cognitive psychologist in Australia, Sydney, and he and other colleagues have furthered this work around the limitations of working memory and how it plays out in different learning scenarios. So two kinds of load can be talked about with working memory. There's extraneous load and there's intrinsic load. Extraneous load is all the extra stuff that we don't really want to be there in the learning task, things that get in the way of the learning, and the intrinsic load is the kind of load that we do want. So Ollie Lovell, in his book from 2020, which is a really helpful guide on cognitive load theory in action, says that extraneous load comes from the manner, structure of instruction and draws students' working memory resources away from the core instruction. Whereas intrinsic load is the load associated with the core learning taking place, and it's the load that we want students' working memories to be occupied with. So the fundamental recommendation of cognitive load theory is to do the following things. Optimize intrinsic load, so make it not too hard, not too difficult, just right, a bit like Goldilocks, and to minimize, wherever possible, however possible, any sources of extraneous load. And that's really important. So this is an example of something that's completely extraneous, some learning that it can't really take place very well because this slide is overloaded with extraneous stuff. I'm going to take you through some of it. There's even some background music that's coming through. I'm not sure if you can hear that. But it is incredibly annoying. I'm going to just make sure that it is coming through. Here it comes. One, but it's not going to make it very easy. So Zach's first clue to correct the code lies in the rectangle enclosure. Next, let's work out. I hope you can help me figure these out. Add the 2 digits to the biggest answer. I'm a little bit lost. But there's crazy fonts. There's crazy animations. Which are just, and this is extraneous load in action. Even my sign is extraneous. It's moving and forming. Oh, that's a little bit better. So that was an extreme example. I know. I hope it gave you a little bit of a laugh. But essentially, we are at risk of creating extraneous load in our instruction at any time. And our job as educators is to try and minimize that extraneous load as much as possible so that there's less working memory being taken away from the core instruction at hand. So something like this, where it's very clean, neat, easy sort of transitions, not a lot of things getting in the way of students' working memory, which is really important. So in terms of sources of extraneous load, you want to think about things like redundant information. Is there text, pictures, sounds, or videos, such as in the previous example, that don't need to be there? Can we remove them? Is there noise in the background? And I know many classrooms are very noisy. We want to try and remove that noise if possible. Are there visual distractions? Too many things on display at the front of the room, at the side of the room, on our slides or worksheets? And are there any other things that are taking working memory resources away from core learning? You might want to pause and think, what are some other sources of extraneous load that you know are contributing to problems in your classroom? So this could include you, the teacher, and the way that you're teaching. So just something to be aware of, that this is not just the environment itself. So in terms of starting the book study, we have talked about chapters 1, 2, and 3 already, and this session is really an opportunity to delve into chapter 4 and hopefully later chapter 5. But I'm really excited to check in with you about your familiarity with some of these indicators that you'll find at the end of the chapters 4 onwards. So check your indicators for chapter 4 includes things like, do you have some familiarity with cognitive load, including optimizing intrinsic load and minimizing extraneous load? And do you have any of these not yet on track or off track indicators, such as working to throw students in the deep end without prior instruction, and focusing on stimulating or appealing learning materials and environment? So that's just a little sample of what might be ahead for you. But I'm hoping that this is a nice introduction to this chapter, and then know that there is many more exciting things for you to learn about in chapter 4, and then its accompanying chapter 5, which looks at 4 misconceptions. I hope that you're enjoying the book study so far, and do reach out with questions, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the book as well.
Thank you, Dr. Swain, for sharing that with us. Let's revisit a few of his key points and discuss how they can be put into practice. Learning is hard work, but when we have a better understanding of the cognitive structure of memory and cognitive load theory, we can make decisions to limit cognitive overload in our classrooms. Throughout the sessions, these 4 points will become clearer as we learn about types of knowledge, about great teaching, and about the forgetting curve. Now we see our ONlit simple model of memory. You'll notice that working memory is shaped to show a bottleneck, to represent that it is limited. Between working memory and long-term memory, you will see 2 arrows going both ways to represent learning and remembering. The more comprehensive model shown by Swain earlier also shows forgetting. We will discuss and learn more about that in our next session and add this feature to our model then. Next, we have a representation of cognitive overload. Because working memory is overwhelmed, learning and remembering cannot take place. Now, we've heard this previously. Educators can make decisions to limit cognitive overload, but how? Let's look into some ways we can do this in our classrooms. Remember, we are trying to reduce extraneous load and optimize intrinsic load. First, we need to avoid instruction that does not match the student's current skill progression within the instructional hierarchy. If a student is still in the acquisition stage and building accuracy, fluency building practices such as repeated reading may not be appropriate yet. If a student is in the adaptation stage, then fully guided instruction may not be appropriate either. We need to plan instruction that aligns with the instructional hierarchy so we can find that Goldilocks fit to be the most effective. Avoid different novel tasks daily. We may think we need to be surprising and entertaining, but new and different each day can lead to cognitive overload and decrease learning. Instead, create predictable, consistent, and efficient instructional routines, especially for essential skills during the acquisition and fluency stage. As Tom Bennett said in his 2020 book, Running the Room, routines are the building blocks of classroom culture. They are crucial for harnessing the science of learning. I would highly recommend listening to him in a book or a podcast. Instructional routines benefit more than just academic learning. Yes, they prevent cognitive overload and maximize learning time, which is our primary purpose, but they also create safety and reduce teacher workload. To be done well, they must be explicitly taught, modeled, practiced, and reinforced. With ongoing reinforcement, they become more predictable, consistent, and efficient. The students take ownership of their behavior and can feel safe to learn because we have created a classroom culture where all students can flourish. Avoid unpredictable, inconsistent expectations. Ensure clear, consistent, predictable expectations. This can do more than just support academic learning. Take a moment to read this quote from the book, How Do We Learn? When teachers provide a well-organized, demanding yet supportive, affectionate, and comforting learning environment that promotes autonomy through consistent rules, students develop better self-regulation skills, especially those with fewer competencies in this area. These things are essential for some students to be successful in a classroom. We do not need fancy buzzwords or to use important instructional time for relationship building activities. We build relationships through evidence-informed instruction so all students can succeed. Another thing I would like to add that I think is really important, but maybe not acknowledged often enough, is that being predictable and consistent is crucial for support staff working alongside you. A colleague of mine once said about having the consistency, the predictability, made her role as an educational assistant so much more effective because she knew what was expected and what was coming next. She could just adjust within the structure to push the student further or pull back as needed. Together, we could reflect on and plan how to adjust things for that specific student, and she would have great feedback for me on things she observed with the entire class. The consistency gave us predictable bursts of time where the student could work with me directly or successfully on their own. This allowed her to then use those short bursts of time to use her incredible skills with other students in the room. Consistency and predictability allowed us to collaborate and create a classroom culture of inclusion and achievement. Let's take a minute to listen to Tom Bennett speak on the episode of the Knowledge for Teachers podcast on how routines and boundaries are the kindest way to support our students who need love the most.
Is that what they need in a classroom is remarkably similar to what everybody needs. They need safety. They need a calm, predictable environment where everyone knows what they should be doing. They need to be treated with dignity. They need to feel like they matter. And they probably need an authority figure in the classroom helping them to understand that they're safe, that they're calm, that things are predictable. And also it helps if you give them meaningful work, which makes them feel like they're doing something that matters. Now, these are intrinsic, fundamental needs of all human beings. It's just that people who are wounded need that a lot more. And so it's a rising tide that lifts all ships. The routines and norms and consequences and boundaries and so on, they're not just some kind of dull Professor Snape type way of running a classroom. They are the kindest way to help and support the people who are the most wounded and who need love the most.
Sometimes being an educator who sticks to routines and boundaries as much as possible, it can feel like you're seen as being boring, too rigid, no joy. However, that is not the case. The routines and norms and consequences and boundaries, they are the kindest way to help and support the people who need our love the most. Avoid distracting or irrelevant decorations and digital elements. I used to spend a lot of my prep time playing with new fonts, GIFs, clip art, borders, creating Pinterest-worthy bulletin board displays. Just creating this single slide deck took me, or slide right here, took me an extra 5 to 10 minutes compared to this. Create a simple, clutter-free environment and displays. It reduces the extraneous load on your students and reduces some of the time constraints on our heavy workloads. Avoid long, unclear lectures. Being clear and concise takes a lot of practice for all educators. Right now, I am working my way through Just Tell Them, The Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching by Dr. Zach Gershell. As this skill is a professional goal of mine this year. One of the focuses is to explain clearly, only say the words that need to be said. We can reduce cognitive load by removing any ambiguous or redundant information in our explanations. A quote I love by Dr. Gershell is, "You build trust by making learning accessible." My goal is to improve my ability to explain so I can make learning more accessible for all of my students. We want to reduce the complexity of a task if it is going to cause cognitive overload, especially during the acquisition stage. So instead, we use a sequence of carefully planned small steps where you can provide instruction and opportunities to practice and give feedback, building accuracy with each step as you progress. In future sessions, we will discuss checks for understandings, or CFUs. On page 67, they are described as the teacher checking if students are learning while the lesson is unfolding, using short, specific checks of understanding and proficiency. There are multiple ways to do this to align with our planned sequence and to improve our instructional decisions, which we will explore more in later sessions. Avoid no or little practice. Earlier in my career, I would have taught a unit and just moved on. Now I try to ensure that any skill that is critical for future success gets lots of practice time that leads to mastery. This promotes chunking and automaticity in memory and will reduce cognitive load for future learning. On page 57, we will be introduced to retrieval practice as opportunities for students to attempt to remember how to complete previous learning tasks or recall previous learned concepts, facts, or skills. There is so much power to improve learning through retrieval practice, so we will spend much of our next session digging into this practice. Rigid. Rigid means firmly in place, not changing. Rigid instruction can mean long, unresponsive lectures. Rigid can also mean differentiated tasks by learning styles that have students rotating for long periods of time, working independently from the teacher. Both these models are rigid, as the teacher cannot adapt the instruction in the moment based on student responses. In adaptive teaching, whole class teaching is planned, and teachers make real-time adjustments for learners based on checking for understanding tasks. As we learn more about explicit instruction, checking for understanding, and retrieval practice, we will be better prepared to try out adaptive teaching in our classrooms. Now, many of these can be described as key principles of explicit instruction. Let's take a minute to listen to Dr. Swain speak about explicit instruction.
Earlier this year, the Victorian Government made a commitment to embed explicit instruction in every classroom. The La Trobe School of Education Momentum Project will help guide schools to make this change. But what exactly is explicit instruction? Explicit instruction is a systematic approach to teaching that involves breaking learning down into manageable chunks and teaching that in a logical sequence. Students will get a chance to practice these small steps. The teacher will check to make sure that they're understanding, and then gradually add more and more complexity. So if you're wondering if your child is experiencing explicit instruction in their schooling, you're going to look for teachers standing at the front of the room, explicitly explaining and modeling what it is they want students to be able to do, and spending a significant amount of time giving students practice and dynamic feedback back and forth on the learning itself. It's not about students struggling through and figuring out for themselves the first time. It's actually a really dynamic process where students are getting the support they need and the modeling that they need in real time, and only moving on to independent work when they're ready. Cognitive science has shown that our working memory, our mental workspace, is actually very limited. So when we present too much information to students at once, they can get cognitive overload. So what great teachers will do is break down the learning into those manageable chunks, allow students to master bit by bit and add all of that into their long-term memory, and then teachers can gradually remove those scaffolds and supports to allow students to feel more confident to take on even more complex tasks. Explicit instruction focuses on building up students' mastery of new learning so that they can get better and better at different aspects of the curriculum and apply those to new learning experiences. When explicit instruction is working really well, students can see the connections between all the information, the skills, the knowledge that they've learnt over time, and connect those to different parts of the curriculum as they progress through the school years.
We can avoid planning for engagement and fun as your first focus. Instead, plan for learning and attention. This is embedded throughout the book, but explicitly found on page 178. We are engaging not because we are trying to entertain or hook students, but instead engaging because we expect and are making it easy for students to respond and actively contribute to the learning as it happens. I used to spend hours online looking for an entertaining hook to engage my students. Now I use instructional routines and use my precious time on trying to improve my delivery of that instruction, so my students are engaged because they are learning. Now let's take a minute to use the chat to share our ideas together. Think about some ways that you currently optimize or minimize cognitive load in your teaching. My example would be that I keep my slide deck display pretty simple and consistent each day. Here is an example of my slide for the new content portion of my block, about 15 minutes of time. I have also color-coded a box beside each step so students know what color duotang they need. Before we begin, I will tell the students what our purpose is, and then it's time for our new content. And together we will say, yellow, red, red, orange, as a signal to get ready. It's plain, consistent, predictable, so they can focus on the reading and spelling, in this case, of silent letters, and not on the task itself. Let's take a moment and review the chat.
Laura, I'm not sure if you can see the chat. Can
Ooh,
you see it? Okay.
Yeah, worked
I'll
examples. Love
I'll
it.
let you take it and run with it.
Awesome. When we have our session with Dr. Cotting, we're going to dig more into worked examples. Routines, chorally repeating. Repeating back chorally is not something I did before, and now it's like a norm in our classroom. That's what we do. Mini whiteboards. It's awesome. And Dr. Swain talks a lot about mini whiteboards. Clear, uncluttered anchored charts. I used to get out those colored, smelly markers, and I'd have flowers on the side and do all kinds of beautiful things. And now I try to make them as clear and as uncluttered as possible. Working to reduce teacher talk, small steps. Routine, routine, routine. Lots of opportunity for responses. And when we go forward with some of our next sessions, I hope to dig in more into that, how we can increase the number of opportunities to respond. Assign spots on the carpet. I love that. Even this year, when we do partner reading, I actually have the 6 partner reading spots that they can sit around the room labeled. Like they can't even, those are set if when they work with their partners, and it has made that transition so much faster. Awesome. Lots of great stuff in there. Okay, so now I'm going to take the question and I'm just going to shift it a little bit. So we're going to add one word to this question and see how our ideas change. What are some ways that you currently optimize or minimize your cognitive load during teaching? We matter too. What is something you do to make teaching easier so you can deliver instruction more effectively? For me, it's my weekly Google Slides. I have all of our routine work linked in PDFs so I can quickly open it and use it with my class. I use the same slides each week, so I just duplicate it or adjust it slightly as needed as the year progresses. As an elementary teacher, even with a structured classroom culture, we still get asked 1,000 questions a day. Can I get a drink? I need a Band-Aid. There's a bird outside the window. Who knows what they're going to come up with? Keeping my planning simple supports my cognitive load, as it is naturally always on the brink of becoming overwhelmed. So let's look into the chat and see what others are sharing. Oh, color code my group folders. Yeah, I do that too. So it's easier for me to find the stuff in the moment when in the busy moment. If I color code stuff, it's much easier to find. Share work with a like-minded teaching partner, double the load. I have a few of those people that are from my school in this chat right now. Start my weekly planning from last year's version. Cool. I love that. Minimize learning goals. Yeah, try to make them as concise as possible. Simple to-do list. Accessing evidence-based scripted programs. Hand signals for responses. A prep bin with all the tools I may need that I can carry around. Yeah, I have like a small group bin that I can pull out, and I have a pencil case with pencils in it that I try to keep under lock and key, because we all know in an elementary classroom, your pencils disappear. And when I need them for small group time, I need them ready. So I try to keep that one pencil case kind of stashed so it's ready to go. Communicate with families on an ongoing basis. I love that. One thing I try to do that a principal shared with me once is to send a sunshine email on Fridays. So Friday after school, I try to send at least one sunshine email out to one of my families, just about something great. And it's such a great way to end your weekend. Like, it's great for that kid and that family, but then usually they send something back to me that's super kind. And it's just such a great way to go into the weekend. Beautiful. Know my curriculum. I love that. That takes a lot of practice and a lot of work. So that's something we're always on the journey for. Okay, excellent. All right, we'll keep going. Now let's finish things up by returning back to the evidence-informed educator series. Now that we've learned more about cognitive load theory, let's add it to our growing resource. First, we have a simple model of memory, a simplified visual to get our journey started. Next, we have adapted this to represent cognitive load theory. Just a visual, not a lot of text. Our third visual combines the two into one page, because as one leads into the other. If you require more information, this version includes a concise explanation of each model. We have also included a one-page summary of intrinsic and extraneous load adapted from table 4.1 from the book. and summarize the do and avoid slides into this one-page table. And we have included a simple visual describing the benefits and essentials of instructional routines. All of these resources are now available on the ONlit resource library for you to use in a way that works best for you and your colleagues on your journey with harnessing the science of learning. So now let's wrap up our session and plan our next steps. Our next session will be on Thursday, February 6th, 7:15 Eastern Standard Time. We will be exploring chapters 4 and 5. We dug into cognitive load theory tonight, but the rest we will save for the 6th. Our Informed Insights expert guest will be Dr. Nidhi Sachdeva. Dr. Sachdeva is an educator, researcher, and evidence-informed learning designer from OISE at the University of Toronto and is chair of Research Ed Conference Toronto. Her expertise will help us explore the cognitive science outlined in these chapters, including types of knowledge, novice versus experts, the forgetting curve, and retrieval practice. We will finish with a few quotes from the chapters we covered tonight. I hope that these inspire us as we move forward on our journey. Truly successful schools should strive for excellence, remedy inequities, and get all students on the path to learning. Changes that can make genuine improvements in the lives of students and teachers. We can learn much from schools that have embraced the challenge of bringing the scientific research to life in their classrooms. Working hard on the right things. This is what teaching can be. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I look forward to seeing you all again on February 6th. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together.